Getting negative feedback on Fiverr is never pleasant, but even people who make a big effort to try and please their Fiverr buyers are eventually going to experience it one time or another. Today, the thing you absolutely must never do in response to negative feedback, and I'll tell you exactly why. Coming up.
The Gig Doctor.
I'm Dane Scott from thegigdoctor.com, top-rated Fiverr seller and voiceover coach. And today, the one mistake that can absolutely harpoon you on Fiverr, and it has to do with our response to negative feedback. Pay close attention to this one. It can literally save your Fiverr life. At the end today, a free head slapper offer where I'll give you a $50 Head Slapper 5 video for free when you get my almost for free 2-hour course, Climbing the Ladder on Fiverr. Please hit the subscribe button and like this video if you would be so kind, and your comments below are super appreciated. Okay, let me unpack this for you. First off, if you have gotten negative feedback on Fiverr, whether it's a lousy star rating and or a negative review, you're not alone. At one time or another, it really happens to everybody. We get so used to those 5-star nice reviews that when someone torpedoes us, it's a shock to the system. It's like we're a ship that's been cruising along just serenely for months, and then suddenly a submarine blasts a hole in our side. Well, let me stick with that analogy for a second. At the moment of the attack, our first and immediate response is to patch the hole and go after whoever it was that shot the torpedo. Go after the sub with depth charges. So we prepare a reply that discredits the remarks left by the buyer and maybe even insults them in turn with some subtle or, well, maybe some not so subtle remarks. At the very least, we feel compelled to tell our side of the story, which amounts to the same thing. It's going on the counterattack. And there's definitely satisfaction in that, let's just face it. And to a degree, it may even help restore our credibility with some buyers a little, depending on how we word our response. Though I think we've all seen responses to feedback that make us think, yeah, that seller really is kind of a jerk. Look at how they went after the customer. Maybe that's why negative feedback is so frustrating. It feels like a no-win scenario. We are danged if we reply, and we're danged if we don't. The situation is bad enough as it is, but if we're not really careful, a day later it can get worse. A lot worse. 24 hours after a buyer leaves a public review, they're contacted by Fiverr in a private way with their little, "Shh, how did they really do?" message, asking the buyer to fill out a form that gives Fiverr that kind of just between us feedback on your performance. If you've ever purchased a service on Fiverr, you've probably seen that. It's like, okay, we'll keep this on the QT, but how did that buyer really do for you? This is where the buyer can respond in complete privacy without worrying about your ever seeing it as the seller. So in a scenario where we've gotten a poor review, the buyer was unhappy, and we've retorted in a reply to their review saying that the buyer was being unfair, that they're a jerk, that their requirements were unreasonable, and all the rest. That buyer is now primed to leave us absolutely miserable private feedback. And unfortunately, that private feedback can be a ship sinker. Well, okay, actually, it's more like a ship stinker. When I'm talking with people, when we do our Gig Doctor sessions together, I compare it to a stink bomb. It stinks up the joint. Bad private feedback, that one that they send discreetly to Fiverr, especially if it happens more than once in a period of months, can seriously affect how Fiverr ranks us in search. I've spoken with people in our Gig Doctor sessions who are just baffled as to why they've absolutely disappeared out of search results and that their sales have tanked. And it can often be traced back to a time when they had gotten into a hassle with somebody and it resulted in negative feedback and very possibly also negative private feedback, which is the real stink bomb. So what can we do to salvage the situation when things go negative like that? That's coming up. First, let me ask you a question for the comments here. Have you had a situation come up like I'm talking about today? And how did you handle it? And now, what would you do differently if it were to happen again? Please like and subscribe to my channel here because I have lots more of these in the hopper. I've been really thinking of some good ideas. So if you like and subscribe, then you'll get notified when new ones are available. And stick around until the end today for a course that has all my very best stuff in it, which is available for practically nothing over at Udemy right now. And it includes a $50 bonus head slapper video. All right, so what's the solution here? I think there are three things we can do. The first is avoid the initial torpedo, that bad public review. That's sometimes easier said than done, I know, but sometimes it's actually easier than it seems. When things start to go south with a client, and you can usually see it coming from communications during the gig that they're less than happy, that's the very best time to head this whole thing off by compromising, being kind and helpful, and above all, not arguing with them, which brings out the very worst in human nature. Instead, take a few extra moments to consider your responses before you reply to your communications with them, and make sure that you try to get things to go right. Let me give you an example. Just yesterday, I received an order from somebody who failed to add commercial rights, which was mainly because they didn't understand what commercial rights meant. So he and I went back and forth on it a couple of times, with me struggling to get him to understand that commercial in this case doesn't mean advertisement, it just means business use, commercial use, business use. I could see the potential for trouble here, so I decided to send him my give-in message, which I have prefab. I have this written out, and I use this from time to time. So it reads like this. It's clear that you just didn't realize it would be required, and I don't want to disappoint you. Let's go ahead and do it without the commercial rights in this case. For future orders, we'll just make sure to include it. Fair enough? Well, guess what? When he saw that I was trying to be reasonable, he went to his team, explained that commercial rights was something normal, they approved it, and he thanked me for my patience. And by showing that I was willing to help him in this case, it disarmed a potential problem, and instead it resulted in a positive experience. And then I went ahead and delivered early besides. So suddenly it's a whole new relationship with this buyer, which could just as easily have gone the other way. So the first and best fix happens during the order itself. Now, if the buyer is particularly gnarly and unreasonable and you just can't satisfy their needs, then I recommend canceling the order. That's number 2. That puts an end to things right there before it gets worse. In those cases, I'd rather not try and complete the order because I just know I'm asking for a lousy review from them, and I'd rather not do the work, if that's the way it's going to work out in the end anyway. Under a new rule, Fiverr actually still allows the buyer to leave a review even when an order is canceled, which I pretty much hate, but I guess I would rather have that than to do all this work for the buyer and know that I'm still going to get a negative review. So from the standpoint of my own peace of mind, I'll cancel. Now, cancellation brings its own downside, as you probably know. It can lower your completion rate. That's the percentage of orders that you successfully complete with clients. And, if you're not getting that many orders right now, even one cancellation may drop you below Fiverr's threshold of 80% completion, which can damage you in the search results. And it can also cause you to drop one level. If you're a level 2 seller, you might go to level 1, or from level 1 to level nothing. Okay, so you need to consider weighing that a little bit before you cancel. Now, that leaves number 3. If you did complete the order, and that buyer left you an ugly 2-star review and some remarks that suggest you're less than something found under a rock, you can either just ignore it and move on, or you can reply in some way. Now, I suggest that you do reply, but do so very, very carefully. So here's the wording I suggest. And I want you to understand that these words aren't what you and I are tempted to say. They're pretty much the opposite of that. I'm sorry that things didn't go well on this occasion. I do strive to make people happy, and I'd love it if this buyer would give me another shot on a future project so I can do better for them. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Yeah, right, like I'm going to want to work with that person again. But that's not really the issue here. What we're communicating is that our philosophy is not self-serving, that while this one didn't go too well, despite our efforts to try and make the buyer happy, which, by the way, does telegraph to other buyers that we did try, the failure to make them happy isn't going to discourage us from trying to make them happy in the future. It's a goodwill gesture. It's a gesture to the buyer that says, hey, let's still be friends. Rather than telling the world, hey, this guy's a jerk, which may or may not be the case. We're just showing that our heart was and is in the right place. Actually, if I were to revise the message, I might even address it to the buyer directly, saying something like, I'm sorry things didn't go well on this occasion. I do strive to make people happy, and I'd love it if you would give me another shot on a future project so I can do better for you. Well, 24 hours after they leave feedback, that's when Fiverr asks buyers for private feedback. So what I recommend is that you reply immediately to any feedback you receive, extending that olive branch right away. By demonstrating you're one of the good guys to them and anyone else who happens to read what you had to say there, the odds go way down that your ship will sink or stink. Over at Udemy, I just celebrated my 900th student, which I think is pretty exciting. One of the courses I'm especially pleased with is my 2-hour course called Climbing the Ladder on Fiverr. I've got a link to it in the show notes. As of when I did this Gig Doctor tip, I think they had it at like $14.99, which is ridiculously inexpensive. So grab it while you can. And to thank you, I'll throw in my $50 Head Slapper 5 video, Knowing the Unknowable on Fiverr, at no charge. Just message me after you've completed the course and I'll make sure you get that. Like, subscribe, leave a comment about this whole feedback thing, and watch for links to some other helpful videos in the closing screen that's coming up here. Talk to you next time.